to do, they ain't do. Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself. Express yourself. You don't never.
On the first day of the program, we came in and there were about 15 people in here. I met a few of the kids, but I really started to talk to Suvan first, and I thought that was really nice that I could talk to her comfortably in a really wide setting with a lot of people. And we started to draw to a really good song. It's a David Bowie song. And I enjoy this program because you get to collaborate with kids and other adults in a very open setting. And it's pretty cool that you get to talk to people that you probably wouldn't meet otherwise.
At the beginning of each program, we listened to cover songs. Helene played one or two versions of the same song. It was really cool because we got to hear different people's interpretations of the same notes. It's kind of like when painters paint landscapes, they often turn out very different even though they're looking at the same material. I liked listening to the music because I got exposed and inspired by other people's artwork.
The portrait exercise was really fun. What we did for the portrait exercise was first we went through the galleries dealing with portraiture. Kalia led us around, and she taught us about sort of how one approaches portraiture and different ways of doing so. And she also taught about how these approaches fit in with their contexts and how you can really mess around with the genre that is portraiture. For the exercise itself, what we did was we sat in two concentric circles, one on the outside, one on the inside. We would hand our piece of paper to our partner and they would draw us. Only they would only get enough time to add one element. And then we would stand up, turn, and hand it to somebody else and they would add on, etc., until eventually you had a finished piece that was you. The cool part about this was, though, is as we would go on for each round, Helene would call out a cue, like you can only use warm colors, or you can only use cold colors, or you can only do line work, whatever the cue was. And this would change sort of the tone of each element of the portrait until eventually you ended up with this beautiful mess of a face.
Although we all had the same cues of cool colors, to use warm colors or different techniques, is that we all interpreted it a different way. So in the end, when we would give our pieces back, we would all have this different sense of like the painting or what we should and shouldn't do. And working from that was really different because you had to apply your own sense of skills and work based on what they gave you. And that was pretty cool because you come up with stuff that you would never originally thought of if it hadn't been given to you that way.
Basically, one of the activities that we did in the satellite program was actually build resumes, which was pretty cool because really not a lot of people do any resume building. You kind of have to figure it out on your own. Like thinking back on it, we actually never talked about resumes at all during high school. With the resume building, we kind of had to reflect on the things we've done, like as our teenagers and whatnot. And so we just kind of had to think back on the experiences and all the volunteer stuff we've done. Because at first, when you kind of lay a sheet of paper in front of a teenager and say, all right, write some stuff that you've achieved, it's kind of like, what do I do here? But then, like, once you spend a little while thinking about it, you realize there's actually quite a few things that you've done, and then you can kind of exemplify that in a resume.
Even as the teaching assistant for this program, the resume building stuff is a really, really valuable sort of activity because in high school, out of high school, no one taught me how to make a resume either, so I was kind of flying blind, trying to like tell my skills to people and trying to apply for jobs without like a functional resume. And having this sort of being taught how to make a resume, and B, having the opportunity to sort of revisit and upkeep that resume as I do more things is really amazing, because after you're out of high school, they want a resume for everything. You know, college, getting a job, they want your resume. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do, everyone's asking for a resume, and so it's really important to have one that like looks professional and lists everything that you've done in a positive light, and isn't just kind of slapped together because you needed something to send to them.
We spent a lot of time in the exhibit Nature and the American Vision, looking at kind of the idea of landscape and not specifically just the things, you know, the face value of it, the grass and the flowers and how pretty that is painted. More of landscape as a metaphor for identity. Because it wasn't just us, you know, of the modern age that struggles with these questions like, you know, who calls himself an American and what does it mean exactly to be American. It was people from when America was a completely new thing. So it's exactly what the painters in here were considering. It's exactly what we're considering right now looking at them.
We broke into groups with me and my fellow classmates, and before we could actually teach the children what the exhibit actually meant, we had to learn it, and we had to go through it and learn like the basics of what it is and actually like what it represented. So when the children came, like we walked around to the galleries and we taught them like individually what the paintings meant. And more specifically, there was a painting, like one of the biggest main pieces in there was by Thomas Cole. It was The Fall of the Empire. I would ask the children like what it meant to them and like why the painter did what they did, what point we are in history, asking them those kind of questions so they have like a better understanding of what the actual paintings meant.
And when kids came in, they were kind of like blank canvases. And so what you say and what you do and what you teach them really has an impact on who they are and who they make themselves to be. So when they came in, we went through the exhibit in the galleries, and they had little sketchbooks. And I just I encouraged them to, you know, to draw what they felt, you know, how they reacted to the pictures. When you get together with these kids that you've never met before, you connect with them on a more personal level, and you really get to know them through not only themselves, but through their art and what they think and what they feel from the art in the exhibit. And I really liked the program because of the way that we imprint on children.
We took the idea of landscapes and applied them to landscapes of our lives and ourselves. And so we consider landscape as a way of looking at personal identity. We took a piece of paper, and on one side we would draw how we saw ourselves, and then on the other side we drew how we felt that other people saw us. So it was interesting because you never really think about writing about yourself or drawing yourself in another person's point of view. It gives you a good idea of how you feel about yourself.
For the project, we took the word landscapes and removed land and inserted different ideas to create a series of different scapes. So, for example, my group came up with a moodscape, and we used different techniques such as contrast and lines to portray a certain kind of mood we were going for. And I shot pictures of nature to portray a calm sense of mood.
Three musicians came, a bass player, a drum player, and a saxophonist. And what we did was we laid our 9 photos on the floor, scape photos that captured emotions such as love, depression, or a dream that one might have. We then showed these musicians older paintings around the museum and the photographs we took, which are newer. We compared them, the parallels of old and new concepts, in response, the musicians played music that reflected our photos, metaphorically and literally.
So after we showed the musicians around in the art gallery with the landscapes, they created landscapes for us through their music with different colors, such as like blue and green, and also different emotions. And it was really interesting because they improvised right on the spot with their instruments.
A poet came in, his name was Jamal Smith, and he spoke to us about different concepts of writing, like shallow versus deep, and when to use it. And then he had us write 5-word poems, and it was interesting because usually you would take a lot to explain like different things in poetry, but then having to condense that all into 5 words was a challenge. And then we all spread out our scape photos along each wall, and then he chose photos and split us up into 3 different groups.
So Jamal split us up into small groups, and we all had to write our own poem on the same photo. And then after we wrote our poems, we shared them with each other, and then we combined them together into one poem and performed that poem, which is interesting because all of our poems were different, but they had some similarities that were unexpected. So my group had a picture of stairs, and we all talked about falling in our poems, so it made it easier and more fun to combine them into one poem.
Well, now for our final project, we are getting everything we've kind of learned from the beginning to now, and we're combining them. We did a random swap between our different scapes, and everyone got someone else's scape. And we're writing poetry and stories about our different scapes, and we are performing them, and then the musicians are coming back and they're performing right on top of us, so it's like genius on top of amazingness, and it's just gonna be awesome.
Express yourself.